Welcome, everybody, to another conversation. This is Guy McPherson conversing with psychologist Peter Miller. At some point, we're actually going to meet in person. I just know that's going to happen, or maybe not.
Probably this summer. Probably this summer.
Maybe this summer. That'd be great. Anyway, we we have decided to have these conversations and record them once a month instead of once a week because I think we were wearing you people out with these long conversations. So today, for the first time in about a month, we're going to talk about life, the universe, and everything else that matters. So I'm sure we'll keep that down
Sounds
to
good.
15 minutes or so.
Yes.
So, Peter, you want to start us off by telling about your course, your free BPT course? What does that BPD mean, and how can people sign up for it?
Sure. Well, it's still available, and I think it will be available uh, for the foreseeable future, as long as we have. It is a course that I developed for mental health. It is specifically tailored for people with borderline personality disorder, because it was a part of my life experience and something subsequently very meaningful to me as wanting to share and help as much as possible. It is one of many free or nearly free resources on the subject. Um, it took me about 10 years to puzzle it all together and to make it into something that could be potentially helpful and have a stepwise progression way to make sense of the whole thing. Uh, and it's at freebpdcourse.com. Borderline, I'll just briefly say, is for people who have emotion regulation issues. It sounds like a much scarier issue than it actually is, and it is kind of a demonized um, mental health issue. But it basically means that a person was born more emotionally sensitive. Um, so if they would feel feelings a few notches higher than your average person. The creator of dialectical behavior therapy, Marshall Linehan, says people suffering from borderline are like third degree burn victims. So it's like if you touch a third degree burn victim, they're going to feel it much more intensely. And then if that person doesn't have the right tools and understanding to live in that kind of body, then they're going to get into all kinds of disordered patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving that make life rather chaotic and very even unbearable to the point of wanting to commit suicide. The suicide rate for borderline population is it's about 10% of people with borderline commit suicide because it becomes so unbearable, and about 40% make the attempt. So that's one of the reasons why it's a very meaningful, important subject in my life, and to try and help with, especially knowing that it doesn't have to be that way. Life doesn't have to be that unbearable, and if you can understand it, and the people around you can understand it better, you can avoid untold amounts of misery and suffering. So it's freely available again at freebpdcourse.com.
Thank you.
That's that.
And again, we had a lot we want to talk about. Among them, I want to put in a pitch here because we escaped a blue ocean event or an ice-free Arctic Ocean again this year. And interesting story, I was getting ready to deliver a presentation last Tuesday, the 16th of April, and I decided that I better check right before I went up there. I better check to see if the U.S. Navy postgraduate school had generated their 6 month ensemble forecast yet. And they hadn't. So I drove the 25 minutes up there and then pulled off the road to get a sandwich. And I decided I better check one more time. And there it was. We are not going to have an ice-free Arctic Ocean this year. And that was amazing. It wasn't there, and then it was there. And so I'm delivering a presentation. That's the point of going to Springfield. And so I had to put in this new information into my laptop before the presentation starts. I was as harried as I've been for a long time, but in a
Mhm.
good sort of way because we that's a significant existential threat for our species and all life on Earth because of the rapid rate of change in the wake of an ice-free Arctic Ocean. So that it's not happening this year, and we know this with great certainty, is about as good a news as you're going to hear from me ever.
It's not your usual style. Right.
Right.
Good
And
news,
for
guys.
and for people who want to see that presentation, Pauline recorded it, but there were issues with the Wi-Fi in the venue, and so she live streamed it on the Pauline Project Love channel. So anybody who wants to watch it can find the live stream from the Pauline Project Love channel. That's three different words, and it's there, so you can watch. And
It sounds like you would maybe experience. Yeah, thanks for indicating where to find that. It sounds like you could experience like some mixed feelings. It's like maybe you're frustrated that the projections don't line up like the scientists talking about them say. But at the same time, it's like good news because now we have a bit more time. How do you feel about it when you get this news?
well, it's pretty interesting because I made a short video that came out the next day or the day after, something like that, very recently anyway. It's called Best Possible News. No, Best News
Mm.
Ever. Best News Ever. That's what it's called.
Mm.
And I point out that because James Anderson was wrong and because Jennifer McKinnon was wrong, I'm wrong. And so obviously that doesn't make me feel so good because of my reputation is at stake. That's basically all I have since I'm not working on campus anymore. I'm not working for pay. And I was wrong. And I've never been so happy to be wrong. This is awesome. Are you kidding me? We're pretty much guaranteed another year of habitat for human animals on the planet. That's that's amazing.
Was there anything indicated in the recent news about that, about why it didn't turn out the way they expected?
No, it's pretty interesting because if I make a mistake like that, people never stop talking about it.
Right.
The same professor at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School developed a projection, and it was in the very prestigious annual review of Earth and Planetary Sciences. How prestigious, it only comes out once a year. And he led that research effort, and it was wrong. We didn't have an ice-free Arctic Ocean in 2016, plus or minus 3 years. And, 2019 seems like forever ago now. It's 5 years ago that they were off. So they're being very conservative with this 6-month forecast that they're using, 6-month ensemble forecast. And so that's good news. And I'm unbelievably grateful that we get another year with life on this planet, including human life, because as a human, I appreciate that. But is it a little
It's
frustrating?
nice to
Yeah.
have. It's nice to have it. Yeah. Uh,
But it
yeah.
is a little
Uh,
frustrating that these sources I rely upon have been wrong. And in this case, it's great that they're wrong, but it's also frustrating because then I lose credibility in citing these people, right?
so there must be some unaccounted variables that they don't even understand yet about like why it doesn't add up the way they thought.
Yes. Yes, but I don't hear anybody going after James Anderson or Jennifer McKinnon and calling them terrible names.
Right. Right. And yeah, I mean they probably they take a different approach to their communication about the subject, right? Which would maybe keep them more out of the spotlight, I suppose. And maybe they probably do that on purpose, right?
Professor McKinnon was quoted in CBS News. That's pretty big venue.
Yeah.
Professor James Anderson was quoted in Forbes.
Okay.
So these are
Yeah.
well-known outlets, but that was 3 or 4 years ago, and so it seemed like it was going to happen, and then it didn't.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah. So I mean it's something to reflect on to kind of go, like how we all try and make sense of this subject. It comes with limitations, right? And I think when I was in university, one of the things that was always emphasized was like if you're going to do any kind of research or writing in that way, or you're going to comment on things, it's like you have to put in the limitations at the end, right?
Hmm.
Like we found this as a result, but these are all the limitations about what we found. And I don't know, maybe the limitations need to be emphasized more
Yeah,
about, like how we make sense of things and what the research papers tell us. They tell us some things, but then we have to put it in a certain perspective or a
right,
certain kind of grain of salt, right?
right. But on the other hand, if you're an expert in the field and you're asked your opinion, I think you have a responsibility to provide it. If you're a public servant, and these people that I'm quoting are
Hmm.
public servants, they're professors at major
Yeah.
universities. So I
So
think that,
you have to make a point of making a point. Like you can't just be so you can't be so um conservative that you end up not making a point.
right, yes, and it's tough. It's hard to tell what got edited out of these interviews as well. So both of them might have said something like, well, I think it's going to go this way, but there's seven different things that might interrupt that, might make slow it down. So you never see the stuff that doesn't make it beyond the cutting room floor. So hard to say.
Hmm. And even if there are limitations, when you achieve a certain result or you come up with a conclusion for whatever research you're doing, um, even if there are limitations, it doesn't mean that you're not still headed in the right direction or you're generally on the right path. Um, you know, it's
Right,
like I've mentioned before, if you're conducting an investigation, it can take a while to uncover all the right things to, to prove that you're still making sense about something. It just there's just some setbacks, right?
right. And some people were displeased with me because in this short video I made describing the ice-free Arctic, the absence of an ice-free Arctic Ocean this year. Because I said we made it through another year, and that's great news. And some people said, not necessarily. We escaped this bullet, but it's a Gatling gun, and there's a bunch of other bullets coming our way too. Maybe we won't make it through another year. Well, could be, but how many caveats can I put in a 4-minute presentation?
Yeah. Well, it could get so confusing that again, you're not making a point, right?
Right,
If you're trying to, continually add other variables and having it something to say or talk about becomes, I don't know, it sort of gets torn to pieces. Um, if you're trying to include every possible, like when I would, again, when I was in university, they would say if you want to have a thesis, right, like you can't have too many things in it.
right,
Otherwise, it becomes something you can't communicate about, or it takes too long to communicate about it. So you have to choose what variables. You can't have so many variables that you can't make a point.
right. I don't want to be in a book club that has 1,000-page book every week, right?
Yeah, I guess yeah, so it kind of speaks to I don't know the ways that we try and make sense of things. We can only look at so many things at once. Does that mean that the points that we're making are that they're not, there's no truth to them? Just because we can only look at a few variables at a time?
Right, right. And we have a propensity for binary thinking. And I strongly suspect this is rooted in evolution by natural selection, that the first person to come out of the cave and look around had an option to either kill this animal and therefore eat well, or to be killed by this animal and therefore to serve as an excellent serving. And so I think we are binary thinkers, and that gets in the way all the time. right? It's me and you, it's us versus them. It's this way of thinking that negatively impacts many aspects of our lives. Do you talk about that in your BPD course?
Oh, well, I think it is inherently in part of the entire program, the entire design. Like one of the things that I realized very clearly when I was getting healthier was that my binary thinking, my all or nothing, black or white thinking, was destroying my life, right? Because I would get sucked into these extreme ways, and then I would have extreme emotions that would go with those extreme ways. And then I would, act on it, right? Which would create chaos and disorder and drama and make life miserable, basically. So, but when you're learning the tools that you need to be healthier, you're learning to live in the gray zone, which is the where both things can have validity,
Hmm.
both perspectives can have validity. So they're right in a way, I'm right in a way, right? Like that's what it means to be dialectical, which means to be not in the polar ends.
And
So
and is that why you're
it's
wearing
like
black and white?
it's the antithesis of being binary, I think, is to be healthy because most social dynamics are a lot more complicated than all black or white, all or nothing, right? If you can't
Yes,
function in the middle, in the gray area, you can't work with other humans
right.
ever, really. Well, it'll just keep breaking apart. Um, because you can't have relationships when you have extreme thoughts, extreme feelings, extreme behaviors. It'll just keep breaking down. So I don't know if that answers your course. Is entirely rooted in that, actually, and overcoming BPD is all about that. Yes,
Excellent.
to
Well,
to discard that binary way.
I suspected as
Mhm.
much, but then you're wearing a black and white shirt, so I was a little confused.
Well, look, there's the gray in the middle, right here. You see, there's the gray right there. So you got the black and white at the edges, and then you got the gray in the middle.
You're right. Where the black and the white meet and things get
Right.
fuzzy.
And then you got the red for the death. I don't know, something like that. But like, yeah, like I think it's something we all need to come to terms with if we want to, if any of us want to live a better life with each other. And it probably is something that has taken hold, like the binary thinking has taken hold in a lot of ways, or people, they even enjoy it in a weird kind of way. And it's influenced the ways that we live our life, which have influenced the the consequences of the ways we live our life, which is, all the environmental consequences that are, the things that you communicate. I mean, basically, you're a communicator of the consequences of the ways we've been living for the last 100 to 200 years, right? Like
Hmm. Right,
you're basically the messenger. You're like saying, "Hey, you've lived this way. This is the basic result. This is the consequence." And I do it in a different vein. I often say, this is the way we live. This is the mental health consequence, right? Like, so, I mean,
well,
there's consequences either way.
right. And a Harvard professor, Howard Gardner, wrote a book. I think it was called The Theory of Multiple Intelligences. And he was trying to point out that in the public school system, we basically are taught two things. We're taught mathematics and we're taught language, but only English, of course, in this country.
Mhm.
And he points out that there's multiple intelligences in addition to those, and ultimately came up with 10 altogether. And they include things like intrapersonal intelligence. That's the ability of an individual to sit there in the night sky and ponder their existence in the universe. Why am I here? That's kind of thing that never comes up in the public school system in this country. People are not encouraged to think deeply about where they are and why they are there. And then there's interpersonal intelligence. This is best illustrated by used car salesmen or people who do retail really well, right? An interaction with another human being. And some people are really good at that, and they're born really good at it. But Gardner points out that all of us can improve on each one of these things, right? So Michael Jordan has great kinesthetic intelligence, like almost nobody else on the planet. And yet he was able to improve on it from day to day, from year to year. Um, and so there are these different ways of thinking about the world, and Gardner, I'm sure, met considerable resistance because he was pointing out that there's more than just black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And and did it brilliantly, by the way. It's a wonderful book, and I've read
I
many
should
of
write
his.
that one down actually. Howard Gardner, you said? Howard.
Yes, Howard Gardner,
Yes.
and it's The Theory of Multiple Intelligences.
Yeah, that sounds like an excellent resource. Thank you. Theory of
And there's a bunch
multiple
of essays out
intelligences.
there for people who don't want to pay 25 or $30 for the book that provide pretty much the same stuff online, um, even in smaller doses.
It's yeah, and I think it's an excellent point. I mean that you make, and we don't try and nurture these multiple intelligences in the context that we're in now. There's only maybe one or two that are really made a priority, made important, which has consequences, right, to the ways that we structure our lives
Absolutely.
and the ways that the things that we think are normal, I guess, right? I'm quite convinced that many of us think that dysfunction is normal. Like there's just so much normalized toxicity, so much normalized abuse. Like lots of the people that I talk to, the environments they grew up in, even if they were very abusive, they thought they were normal because it's what they were
Right.
introduced to in the first place.
For so many years, I thought my family was the only normal one. And then I discovered that my family was as normal as all the rest. And that's not something to be proud of.
Mm.
Normal is abnormal. Normal is completely dysfunctional.
Sadly, I think that's true, which and often means an absence of understanding how to be well.
Hmm.
People call this absence of understanding normal, or they think they have a recipe for wellness, but they don't, or it's backed by nothing, or what we actually see from the recipe is the opposite. We don't see mass scale wellness. We don't
Hmm.
see that.
Right.
So the institutions that claim to be able to teach these things through, and I think a lot of spiritual institutions claim to have a recipe for wellness. I don't think they do.
Mhm.
I really don't. um, so yeah, I mean, I guess I wanted to bring it back just a couple of steps. I wanted to make sure that we weren't invalidating the work that you've done over the years. Like, I think you still make valid points about the direction that we're headed, even if there are hiccups in the research. It doesn't mean that the general direction of the issues that you talk about is incorrect. Like we're still on the cusp. We're on the cusp of not having an Arctic. Like it's not right. It's not like the Arctic is healed. Like we're on the cusp of losing it at any point in time, right? That's still the case.
Right. And in fact, I came across two ideas for the first time within the last week. And each of these two ideas indicates another existential threat. So I I previously had made short videos called Edge of Extinction. No, no, Means of Extinction. They were called Means of Extinction, and then they had the means by which we were pursuing extinction after that. So I'm going to add two more. Yay. I've come across two more reasons that we are pursuing our own extinction.
Like feedback loops, similar, right?
Yes, in one case, we've disrupted the salt cycle on Earth to such a great degree. The amount of salt that we're taking out and putting back in all the wrong places, of course, is messing with the system, as of course you would expect, right? You can't take salt from one place and put it in another place without having consequences of an environmental
Right.
nature. And then there's something called the Atlantic, what is it? Something current, ACC. It escapes me right now, even though I wrote the script for this thing this morning. So like 4 hours ago. No, I can't remember. But anyway,
Mm.
this this Antarctic current has been so disrupted by,
I just found it. Antarctic circumpolar current.
there you go, the Antarctic circumpolar circulation or current. Yeah,
Yeah.
circumpolar current. That's right. And we have messed with the climate systems to such a large degree that we're actually changing this millions of years old current, and obviously not in a good way. So, yeah,
Right. So
there's more
it's
than one
we're,
way to
we're
skin a cat. And I don't know why people are skinning cats anyway, but there's more than one way to drive ourselves to extinction. And it seems like we're pursuing all of them.
and maybe we should kind of get to a bit of the bottom line about why these feedback loops, these mechanisms of destruction, if you will, they keep adding up, right? So if you have a certain way of living, it's almost like impossible not to create these loops or these destructive forces, right? Like, so if you have a way of life where people are occupying territory or claiming private property or trying to continue accumulating wealth and privilege and comforts and status, if that's your way of life, wouldn't it be more or less impossible to not create these things that you find? Like you found many of these things to the point where it's absurd, almost like there's so many of them.
Right, right. And only one is required to make climate change irreversible, right? And even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change admits that there's one. And there are now dozens of them that have been identified. And so at some point, what that means is the system is out of our control. There's nothing all 8 billion of us, we can't even get together and flip a coin all at the same time. It's still not going to matter because we've triggered these events over which we now have no control. This is not an excuse for self-immolating. This is not an excuse for setting yourself on fire or shooting yourself with a gun or whatever. None of that makes any sense because from the time most people were 12 years old, they knew they were going to die. That doesn't make them go out when they're 13 and commit suicide. It doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, I'd like to just throw in a little piece. Um, um, we've talked about how the Earth is like an organism, sort of like a human body, right? And even maybe like with an intelligence or like a brain, even like with all of its interconnected ways of doing its thing, right? The Earth, right? Um, I mean, like with humans, and then the work that I do every day, I think that we can have what I call them automations or like automatic thoughts. So you can end up with these certain processes that just keep repeating. Almost, I think they're like feedback loops. It's just automatic looping, right? So you keep having a thought that I'm a bad person, right? It just keeps coming back. It's like automatic, because it's never the system or the lack of knowing how to deal with that has allowed it to be. So this automation keeps going and it keeps harming the person every day. Um, so I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, if it was ever possible for humanity to know itself and to understand how to be healthy on such a large scale and to create a system that accommodated that, could some of these automations, feedback loops, uh, be altered or tamed, reduced? I mean, it would take such a mass scale effort that it would seem impossible to just ponder because we're so steeped in this capitalist, for lack of a better word, capitalist way of living. We're so steeped in it. We're such believers of it, like it's the only way to be. And it's taken on such a powerful what do you want to call it? Influence on everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I don't know. What do you think of that? Just as sort of a side piece, like, and just sort of something to ponder. Like, if you look at the Earth as like a human organism that functions in it's kind of a similar way. Like the Earth breathes, humans breathe, right? There's automatic things that have taken on a life of their own, sort of like automatic thoughts can happen with a human. Um, can the health of the earth be mm, considered in the same way? Um, and even if we could consider it that way, could I guess could humans make any difference, or
Well,
is the Earth an individual entity, or are we that tied into it that we can actually uh, influence its overall well-being? Am I making sense?
yes, well, that was James Lovelock's idea, the idea of Gaia, of a living planet that was interconnected and included all the organisms on the planet. And he came up with that idea, must have been in the late 1970s. So we've had that out there for a long time. And yes, I've been trying to get people to recognize for a long time that what we do individually, collectively, as a society, whatever, has implications for the other species on the planet. We are one. We are all interconnected. And if we mess with the salt system, for example, or we mess with the Antarctic circulation system, then that's going to have consequences that go far beyond us as a species and include all life on Earth. So it's it's simultaneously very powerful to think about and also very debilitating because if you reach the conclusion that every time I reach for a bite of ice cream, there's 27 animals that are going to die, well, that can be a little debilitating, especially
Yeah.
for me and my love for ice cream.
Well, yeah, you could feel like a perpetrator. You could start to feel guilt or shame.
Mhm.
Uh, so, I mean, it's important for people to have an understanding that, how to work with those emotions. And I hope that that's being built into our talks, and for people to continue turning to resources to learn how to live with the emotions that come with being part of a dysfunctional system. Like it's not easy to, well, to first know how to work with your emotions and live in a body that has emotions, and for those emotions to not take to steer you to annihilation. Um, so yeah, learn about how to work with what you're feeling when you're living your everyday life in a system such as this.
Right.
Because it's, if you're not a psychopath, which I think most of us are not. Psychopath means that you don't feel any guilt for anything, right? You can live your life with guilt free, sort of, which is, I don't think that's not human. It's a very weird aberration. Um, but I think, yeah, most of us have a conscience. Most of us do care, and we, even if we don't say it blatantly, we do care about each other. We do care about this earth. We do want the best for everyone. Um, but that comes with, feeling,
Hmm. Right.
and lots of ways of thinking about what we're doing. So you need to have a bit of mastery about how to work through that, so you don't conclude, well, I should just die because I'm part of this dysfunctional system, and I'm contributing to the harms, which I don't have any other way of living that I know. Like, I grew up in this way of life. It's all that I've ever known. Um,
And
and why should I continue beating myself up for that, right? Like,
right. And as I've said a few thousand times, it's not your fault. As an individual, it's not your fault. You were born into the system that you now occupy. You didn't have any control over that, as with most other things in your life. I think this is
right.
a good point for you to mention again your course, freebieptcourse.com, and tell us what that is a little bit. And then I'm going to talk just very briefly about something if I can remember all the way from here to there.
Okay. I wanted to throw in one more analogy that I recently heard of that I think is really kind of relevant and cool. This tree behind me. I mean, look at it. Look, think of humans like trees. So it looks like we're individual, like we're all separate. But then if you go down, there's the root system, right? And then, so we're all actually connected in everything that we do through the roots that we don't see. So, I mean, something to, kind of think about, like, my actions do have an influence. And for better, it can be for the better or for the or worse. And I think even though like there's lots of things that we do that are contributing to the harms, there's lots of things that we can do that can contribute to the health. And so again, it's not all or nothing, black or white, right? We're
Mhm,
not,
mhm.
that's not what humans, I don't think that's our nature really. Like we make mistakes, we do harms, and we also do helpful things and loving things. So we're a mixed bag. I don't think there's any way out of that.
Right.
Maybe no matter what system we're in. So we're a mixed bag, and so then we shouldn't think of ourselves as all good or all bad. We're somewhere in the middle, which is the healthy place to be, you know.
Right.
And if you can reside there, you're probably more likely to live out your life. Uh, but yeah, again, the course you can find about the things that I've elaborated on today in discussion with Guy, and the things he talks about, you can find my take on all this and health at freebpdcourse.com. And enjoy. I hope that it can it can make life a bit easier when life is kind of hard as it is, but it doesn't have to be nearly as hard as we make it without knowing stuff. When we know more stuff, life becomes a little bit less painful, which is better than more painful, right?
Yes, less pain is better. And I just wanted to mention that I delivered a presentation last Tuesday, the 16th of April, and it has been uploaded onto the Pauline Project Love channel. And I suspect Pauline will get it downloaded and edited within the next week. So you'll be able to find it on the Nature Bats Last channel, which is where we put most of our stuff. So look forward to that if you don't mind. And thank you again, Peter. I look forward to our next conversation, and thank you for taking the time to make this one happen.
Thanks, Guy. Enjoy it every time.